Viewers aren't stopping because they recognize the song. They're stopping because the voice doesn't match the age. When clips of Lucy Thomas first began circulating widely online, many viewers reported the same reaction: confusion, followed by disbelief. The voice sounded mature, controlled, and unusually composed, especially for someone so young. In an era dominated by fast-paced content and instant gratification, her performances created an unexpected pause. People stopped scrolling, replayed the clip, and often searched for confirmation that what they were hearing was authentic. From a reporting standpoint, this reaction is significant. Viral moments typically rely on spectacle, controversy, or novelty. Lucy's rise followed none of those patterns. There were no visual stunts, no dramatic backstory introduced up front, and no aggressive marketing strategy. Instead, the attention centered almost entirely on vocal quality. Analysts who track online engagement noted that comments consistently focused on tone, emotional control, and technical precision rather than personality or image. This kind of response is rare in modern digital ecosystems. Algorithms favor speed and repetition, yet her content traveled steadily, often shared by older audiences and international viewers. That demographic detail would later become important, especially as attention from outside the UK began to grow. And that international response would soon shift the conversation in an unexpected direction. But the spread of her voice didn't stay local for long. What makes this case unusual is not how fast it spread, but how quietly it did. Unlike many emerging artists, Lucy Thomas did not appear to follow a typical digital growth blueprint. There was no sudden pivot to trend-driven content, no abrupt rebranding, and no attempt to capitalize on controversy to accelerate exposure. Instead, her performances circulated organically, often uploaded by third parties or shared through recommendation rather than promotion. Media researchers describe this as secondary virality, where content spreads because viewers feel compelled to pass it along rather than because it is repeatedly pushed. In Lucy's case, that compulsion appeared rooted in emotional response. Viewers described feeling calm, reflective, or unexpectedly moved, reactions that contrast sharply with the high-energy engagement most platforms reward. This slow-burn growth pattern also reduced the risk factors typically associated with sudden online fame. There were fewer backlash cycles, fewer opinion splits, and limited negative discourse. However, that same calm trajectory introduced a different challenge: expectations. When an artist gains attention primarily for perceived purity and control, audiences tend to guard that image closely. By late stages of her rise, fans were no longer just listening. They were watching carefully. And that scrutiny intensified once a particular audience began responding in large numbers. The most dramatic surge in interest didn't come from home. It came from across the Atlantic. Data from video platforms and streaming analytics showed a notable shift. A growing percentage of Lucy Thomas's views and engagement originated in the United States. This caught industry observers off guard. Historically, classical and crossover artists struggled to gain traction in younger American demographics, especially without mainstream radio support. Yet the response was consistent. Comment sections filled with remarks comparing her sound to earlier eras of music, often referencing a sense of missing calm in modern listening habits. Cultural analysts suggest that this reaction reflects broader fatigue with overproduced pop and algorithm-driven repetition. Lucy's performances, by contrast, offered restraint and clarity. From a news perspective, this matters because international validation often acts as a tipping point. Once American audiences engage at scale, industry attention tends to follow. Not publicly, at least not immediately, but quietly, through monitoring and internal discussions. At the same time, increased visibility brings increased pressure. With more eyes watching, even minor changes become noticeable. And while nothing outwardly shifted, concern among longtime supporters began to surface in subtle ways. The conversation was no longer just about talent, it was about sustainability. Success doesn't always announce pressure, sometimes it hides it. There has been no public controversy surrounding Lucy Thomas, no reports of conflict, no visible distress, and no statements suggesting difficulty. Yet media psychologists note that young performers often experience pressure long before it becomes visible. In Lucy's case, that pressure is inferred rather than documented, based largely on audience behavior. Fans began analyzing performances more closely. Comparisons between recordings became common. Commenters debated vocal maturity, range, and stylistic direction. While largely supportive, this level of scrutiny reflects a shift from admiration to expectation, a subtle but meaningful change. Historically, young vocalists face a unique challenge as their voices naturally evolve. Changes are inevitable, but public audiences often resist them. This creates a paradox where growth is necessary, yet deviation is criticized. Observers point out that maintaining artistic identity during this phase requires careful packing and strong guidance. What stands out in this case is the absence of reaction. There were no defensive statements, no public reassurances, and no visible attempts to manage narrative. That silence has kept speculation minimal, but it has not eliminated it. Because speculation tends to grow when information stays limited. When nothing is announced, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. Toward the end of 2024, conversations within music reporting circles began to shift. Without formal announcements, subtle indicators suggested increased industry monitoring. These included playlist placements, professional-grade production changes, and increased coverage by established music commentators. It's important to clarify, no confirmed deals, no public contracts, and no official transitions have been reported. However, industry patterns show that this stage often precedes major decisions. Labels and collaborators typically observe audience stability before making moves, especially with younger artists. At the same time, fans expressed mixed emotions. Some welcomed the possibility of broader exposure, while others voiced concern about maintaining artistic direction. This divide is common when an artist's appeal is tied closely to authenticity. From a journalistic standpoint, the most notable element is restraint. There has been no visible rush, no oversaturation, and no abrupt changes in presentation. Whether this reflects strategic planning or personal choice remains unclear. What is clear is that timing now plays a critical role. This year isn't about discovery, it's about direction. As 2025 unfolds, Lucy Thomas is no longer an emerging curiosity. She is a known presence with a defined audience and a recognizable sound. That changes the stakes. The next steps, whether public or subtle, will likely shape how long her influence lasts. Media analysts suggest that this period is less about expansion and more about preservation. Artists who navigate this phase carefully often build lasting careers, while those pushed too quickly risk losing the qualities that made them distinctive. What makes this situation compelling is the lack of urgency. No countdowns, no announcements, no dramatic reveals. Instead, there is patience from both the artist and the audience. That patience may ultimately be the most unusual aspect of the story. Because in a digital world driven by immediacy, waiting is rare. And sometimes, waiting changes